Well, greetings, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Well, welcome. Welcome to another enlightening episode of Quantum Nurse Freedom International live stream, and where we usually deep dive or dive deep into the truths behind the systems shaping our world. So I'm Grace Asagra, your creator host, and with me is my good friend, special guest, Dr. Reza. And also, I have Hartmut Schumacher as my ongoing co host. And if the day is auspicious, then Drago will come in and Hartmut will come in. But most of all, we welcome Alex Krainer, another powerful voice in the realm of geopolitics and economic analysis. And I'm very grateful that he is a repeat guest, return guest, as they said. Alex, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Grace, and welcome to everyone. Greetings to your viewers.
So, in this episode, the gods of finance and dogs of war, unmasking the power behind global conflicts. This is based on the exact title and article of our guest, Alex Krainer. And so I asked him to really help us go behind the headlines again and continue to explore all these hidden driving global wars, economic upheaval, and the struggle for human sovereignty. So, from central banks to shadow diplomacy, Alex will help us really decode the patterns of control and how we, the people, can reclaim our power. Because at the end of the day, it's up to each and every one of us to really reclaim our power. Okay, so in before I pass it on to Alex to help us decode this pattern, I I made a little synopsis, Alex, and so allow me to read a brief synopsis of your article. So, in your article, you delve into the exploration of the intertwined roles of financial elites and perpetual warfare. And in many past video interviews that you've had, you have referred these financial elites as the global banking hereditary oligarchy. And for me, that is very descriptive, and I can relate to that. And of course, the perpetual warfare is you use the word insatiable. So it's like no appetite. So you posit that high level banking interests have significantly influenced major historical events, suggesting that financial motives often underpin military actions. And furthermore, you examine the 2003 Iraq invasion, proposing that beyond the publicly stated reasons, there were underlying financial objectives. So the discussion in your article extends so much to the prevalence of financial crimes and their impact on global stability. And thank you again for being with us. So I pass it on to you and help us decode. But right away, I think maybe for those who haven't read the article, and I suggest that you follow Alex and read this article in alexkrainer.substack.com. Okay, so primarily you can follow him there, but he has other websites and links that you should get in touch with him. So, and so what, who or what are these gods of finance? And I was thinking maybe we could also include, is Trump part of the elite, financial elite, or so? Help us. And Alex, take the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. I'll start from the last question. I don't think that Trump is part of this elite. It seems to me that Trump wants to nationalize the Federal Reserve, and I think that okay, so basically, the choice before the American administration is either to perpetuate the current system of, the which we could call the British free trade system, or to transition the United States to the system that we might call the American system of political economy. The difference is that the American system of political economy, which has been championed by people like Friedrich List, Alexander Hamilton, it has been explained in a 1951 book by Henry Carey called The Harmony of Interests. Henry Carey was the economic advisor to Abraham Lincoln. And this system, what it does is it allocates credit. It allocates credit to productive uses, to industrialization, to building of infrastructure, to supporting small and medium-sized enterprise in a nation. And it's focused on production of useful goods that, over time raises the standard of living in an economy. And so this applying, and it also includes protectionism. It includes shielding domestic industries from foreign competition. And so applying this system is what made the United States a global economic superpower in the past. At the same time, the British system of free trade fully opens an economy to foreign goods. Usually the cheap imports crush the domestic industries, and the system devolves to financial speculation. Over time, it produces polarization of wealth. It destroys domestic production, and it creates the boom bust cycles. Because the financiers base their activities on capital gains. So it's all about pumping up asset bubbles and then collapsing them, and then buying up the choice assets in the economy on the cheap after the crash, and then wash, rinse, repeat. It's almost perpetual, and it also has a very strong tendency to produce fascistic types of totalitarian governments, and to give rise to permanent wars. And it seems to me that Donald Trump is trying to transition away from the British system of free trade towards the American political economy. He has said certain of his statements clearly indicate so. He said that he wants to make the United States an economic industrial superpower again. And you will not achieve that with the British system of free trade, as we have seen over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 decades, that the free trade system has been applied. So this is a very, very disruptive transition. It's going to trigger a lot of enemies, a lot of opposition, and it will be a whole lot easier for Trump to come into the White House and not to rock the boat, to just continue the same system that we have had at least since the 1980s. That would also give him. He would also have fewer enemies if he perpetuated the same system, and particularly the bankers would be very happy with him. The fact that he's initiated this transition with the tariffs wrecking ball suggests to me very strongly that he's not in that camp, that he's not part of that oligarchy. Okay, so how does this give rise to wars? Basically, we have to take a step back and see how money comes into circulation. And I think, as most people understand by now, money comes into circulation almost exclusively as debt. Not all of it, but most of it. About 97% of all money in circulation is debt. It reflects debt, meaning when I raise credit in the bank simply credits an amount of money to my account out of thin air. They just, make some key computer entries into the computer system, and then I have money to spend. The problem is that I have to return that money with interest, except interest never went into circulation. So the only way, if I borrow 100 and I have to pay back 110, the only way for me to be able to pay back 110 is to earn it off of other people through trade and commerce. And the only way for them to have those 10 extra dollars is because other people, governments, companies also have to raise money. Raise credit. If no credit is raised, if no debt enters the system, we would have next to no money in circulation at all. Okay. In order for banks to issue credit, they need money, good collateral. They need, they need reassurance that if you can't pay back your loans, that they will be able to avoid losing on that loan by repossessing your car, your house, or whatever it is that you have. And the problem with this system, as I explained, the only way for anybody to be able to pay back their debts is for other people to take on debt, so that the aggregate mass of money in circulation always grows, and it always has to grow for the system to be stable. Now, at some point, this system will saturate the economy with debt because there's only so much collateral in it. You could go to the bank and maybe get $100,000 loan, but you wouldn't be able to go to the bank and get $1 billion loan. Maybe Elon Musk can, but most people cannot. And so once you've taken on a certain amount of debt, depending on what your income is and depending on what your net worth is, that's it. You cannot borrow beyond a certain number. So the ability of banks to expand the credit cycle has limitations. And then as soon as the amount of money in circulation stops growing, then the system inevitably goes into a collapse. And so what the bankers need to keep that Ponzi scheme going, so that it always grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, they need to add wealth, they need to add collateral into the system against which they can issue more credit and more credit and more credit, right? And then, by the way, we have to recognize that when a bank issues credit, they create assets on their balance sheets. So my debt to my bank is an asset of that bank. And if they created it out of thin air, they just snatched an asset out of thin air, which is my debt. And now I have to work and figure out a way to pay it back. For them, it's just, they just sit there and they expect payments every month, right? And so this is an asset because they will collect more than they loaned me. But the problem then emerges, how do you add more collateral in a system that's saturated with debt? Okay, it's possible that new inventions, new technologies, population growth, that all of these factors increase the wealth of the system and its ability to take on more debt, but it's not infinite. So then another solution is to go abroad and to seize the collateral of other nations. So if a country has rich oil fields, extensive oil reserves, or gold reserves, or you can, create coffee plantations or tobacco or sugar plantations, things like that. Whatever can generate cash crops. Then you could extend credit on that basis. So let's say your client is an oil company, and if they went to Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Nigeria, and start exploiting the oil reserves there, then you can lend them money for that development, and that then becomes an asset on your books, because that company, your client, now has to repay those debts to you. Of course, the problem here is that the people in Nigeria or in Kazakhstan might say, no, we don't agree with this. We're gonna give this business to our local banks and our local oil companies. Well, then you need political control over those countries. So now, in the past, they used to be done as a rule by military conquest and colonization. Today, it can be done that way, or it can be done by installing puppet regimes through, coups, color revolutions, assassinations of leaders who don't cooperate with you, and so on. But basically, there's a very, very strong incentive to try to take control over other nations' resources. And that way you can keep the Ponzi scheme going for as long as you can find new collateral and new resource wealth to finance. And then those loans are new assets on your books. And the financialized expression of that wealth, it keeps flowing to your banks. So this is how the system works and has worked for centuries now. It's been refined over the years, because at the initial stage of the colonization process, European powers sent their armies to these countries to take control of them. And then the colonizers went there themselves and organized farms and mining operations and what have you. And well, that was hard, because people would rebel, and then a lot of time these colonizers would end up killed. And then we had the Dutch East India Company and British East India Company, who actually were made so much money in this that they were able to field their own armies. But that's expensive. That's a cost. If you're a business, you want to reduce your costs. So they figured out a way to transfer that cost to the taxpayer and to have governments do the enforcing and maintaining political control.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. It's really good, and for all the viewers who may still have doubt that this is really happening, it's exactly what US just signed with Ukraine, right? They just finished signing the contract for that rare minerals. And when you were talking about this, all I could think of is how we the people, especially the ones in the labor sector, are the ones really working so hard to keep the system going in terms of economy, right? And he said that if there's an active exchange within the local system, then it would be that's how that's a better way to keep the system going. So, and maybe before I perhaps continue, Alex and Reza and Hartmut will do continue. I remember, I just want also to honor that today, May 1st, is the International Workers' Day. So, and then, so I know this was posted and Joaquin Flores channel, and we just want to honor that it's American roots for the International Workers' Day. So continue, and Reza, continue, and Hartmut, please.
Go for it,
Wow.
Doctor, then I'll ask.
Yes, Grace, you said it. Today is the International Working Day. And I want to remember that the last 6,000 years, nothing has changed. Because during the time of the pharaohs, the slaves have to work 7 months for free on the pyramids, and they work, in 5 months they could work for themselves. And in the moment, for example, in Germany, we have taxes 50, 55, well, 53%. So you work 6 months for the government and 6 months for you. So nothing has changed over the last 6,000 years from this kind of perspective. And I want to emphasize something that how it also works in Africa and in other states. Very deep involved in this business is the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, because if, for example, if a government in Africa wants to develop its country, they need a credit from the Western banking system. In order to get a credit, you need a sovereign guarantee. And there's a sovereign guarantee and there's a parliamentarian guarantee. The parliamentarian guarantee is guaranteed by the parliament who is in power. But as a government will change after 4 years, it has no international credibility. So you need a sovereign guarantee, which is signed by the World Bank or International Bank and IMF, so that you have the possibility to confiscate it. For example, if China, let's say, if China is in an African country, is developing infrastructure, and they will get as a collateral a sovereign guarantee with respect to the port. So if a country in Africa cannot pay its debts, theoretically, China has the possibility to confiscate the port, and all the profit will go to the port. It will go to China. And this is the way how the Chinese or all the other Western countries can expand their power in Africa, so that they don't confiscate anything and ask for more collateral, mines, raw commodities, etc. And so they can exploit it. Yeah. This is and the international banking system has also a very tough, very intelligent apparatus, and these are the bonds. For example, government or also create different kind of bonds backed with collaterals. And these bonds are also sometimes, not all, but sometimes are also controlled by the Secret Service industry. The Secret Service industry is also involved in banking system, in the banking system. And with this money, you can also control different areas of the world. You can control the money flow, because in the banking system there are several banking systems. There's, for example, the IBAN system, the SWIFT system, but for example, the German Deutsche Bank has the FX4 server. And if you want to establish money in the system, you have, for example, an asset which is for us has no value. Yeah, for example, if I would give it to Alex, it would have no value. But the international banking system has agreed that this bond or this asset has a value. So they can bring by a credit money from a different system in the SWIFT system in billions. And so they create also debts and can create money without any limits for themselves and for their purposes. Have you heard about that? Alex, do you have heard about these things?
Yes, Hartmut, I have, but I think I heard them from you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think that in one of the last conversations we had, you mentioned something along these lines, and it was news to me at that time. But yeah, I have.
No, and the point is that the commodities are the US dollar is now backed. It was backed by gold, then it was backed by oil, and now we can say it's backed by military. And because of the military presence all over the world. And in my opinion, President Trump will his target is to ensure that the dollar is the strongest currency in the world. And interestingly, for example, in Germany, we have changed the law to the security law so that Germany has the possibility to support financially every country on this planet which is attacked by war. And in my opinion, such a law can be used in order to establish Germany as a bad bank, so that Germany will finance the country which is attacked, and this money will be used for weapons which will be sold by the USA.
Are the Rothschilds still in Germany, or they moved to the UK now?
Where the Rothschild is, I don't know. The Rothschilds are everywhere. You have to understand there are many branches of the Rothschilds family. The Rothschilds family is all over the world.
No, the one that lends money.
There are only I don't want to mention the number, but there are less 100 people involved in financial institutions. And these people.
I think what you and Alex have described is, so I was writing papers for my academic work, and I was one of my papers had the title Post-Colonial Era. And then after a few months of looking at the news and everything that's happening in rare earth minerals and Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré taking back his country, so forth, I said we don't live in post-colonial era, we live in neo-colonial era. Nothing has changed from the way they controlled the world from the East India Trading Company of Holland or UK to now. What's happened is there's the facade of elections and government that me and you think we have some kind of control over, which we really don't, because you give one vote and for 5 years they do whatever they want to do, which is usually against the will of majority of the polls that happen. So what's happened now, this new colonial system of the West, hegemonic West, trying to rule the world, is they take the commodities of the world, not just rare minerals, but oil. And one of the issues Iran has is, for many years, Ayatollah Khamenei and others who have foresight have said, look, stop selling crude oil. We need to set up refineries. We need to set up petrochemical plants that convert this massive barrel of oil for $50 to something that becomes worth $400-500. And that not only brings more currency into the country, it's easier to sell, more difficult to track, and also you're creating technology, which means you're creating extra job and industry for the country. And that's why I believe some of these African countries like Ibrahim Traoré is trying to do, without hopefully him being assassinated, and other countries want to do, but because of the interference of the US and its allies, UK and the EU, have tried to prevent this. So we definitely live in a new colonial era where colonization continues, but in a new format. Democracy was the new format of feudalism, and new colonial is the format of the old colonialism. And so I want to take it back to my kind of expertise, which is Hollywood, where I was, until I listened to a lot of the podcasts, I listened to almost every podcast that Alex has a discussion on, I realized how much finance controls the elite that control what who we're voting for or think that runs the countries. And when you look at every direction these major economies like the US and the UK take, it's about money. And after the money comes, let's create an ideology that, because I used to think, is there an ideology that then creates the way to, generate the money and gather the money? It's not. It's the money, and how do we make that seem okay in the minds of our followers? So those who are part of the small group of people that run that world, ideology is created. And when I was doing my PhD, I was looking at Hollywood, and I was looking at how Hollywood represents Arabs and Iranians and Afghans and all of this stuff. And I knew up to about 25 years ago, Chinese were represented in a fairly negative way. And then something happened. Something happened where in the last 20 years, the Hollywood system decided not to represent the Chinese in a negative way. I think, why is that? What happened? China became the largest cinema grossing country over the United States. And if you have 5 major studios, Disney, that controls Fox and Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Columbia TriStar, they're one, and Sony, which owns Columbia TriStar, and another one. If these companies that are multi-billion-dollar companies, they don't want to lose money. So when they make a Marvel movie, their aim is to make 1 billion, 2 billion, not 100 million. Before, like if you made 100 million, film was a success. So if 400 million comes from the US, that's domestic, 700 million, and China matches that, that's double your profits, right? So from then on, I noticed no Hollywood film, maybe independent ones, yeah, but Hollywood producers are producing anything that represents China in a negative way. To the point where they made, I don't know if Alex and Hermit remembers, do you remember the film Red Dawn from 1980, I think 3, with Patrick Swayze, where the Russians and the Cubans attack and they take over parts of America? They remade that in about 10 years ago, 5-6 years ago. And initially they had the Russians and the Chinese who take over America. Then they said, wait a minute, if you do this film's not going to be shown in China. We're going to lose money. So they went back and digitally changed the flags and the language the Chinese soldiers were using to North Korean. So it became North Korean Russians have attacked and took over Russia. So I've come to the conclusion that it's not as complicated as some people make it think, that, this president or this prime minister or this government, that government. It all comes down to money, and money equates power, and power then creates ideology to support that triangle. And then the media, the legacy media or Hollywood or whatever, is the propaganda machine that is utilized by these elites to push the agenda. Because if you look at every single major news outlet in the US and every major outlet in Europe, you look at Euronews or France 24 or BBC or Sky, I've never noticed in the last 25, 30 years any of them question any foreign policy of any government, be it Labour, Conservative, Republican, Democrat. How could it be that all of them have been right and the news is telling us the truth? Either that, which we know is not true because of the wars that have been criticized by themselves, Iraq war and Afghanistan war and so many other wars, that we've come to the point where the mainstream media that is supposed to be unbiased, BBC and so forth, when they do one documentary with Louis Theroux called The Settlers, came out a couple of days ago, it was such a big event that people have said, wow, the BBC's done such a great job, that after 2 years, 600 days of genocide, they put out one documentary, which they'll probably remove from iPlayer and you won't see it again unless you look for it somewhere. One documentary is supposed to demonstrate how unbiased and wow, they've gone against the grain. And so the money controls all of this problems that we have, all the wars in the West Asian region and in all of these regions, everywhere else really. And so I would recommend the audience to definitely read Alex's articles and listen to his podcast, because it opens your eyes to, it's not as complicated as we think. It's genuinely about follow the trail and then you go where the money is. And that's how the ideology and then the propaganda is created afterwards. And I think one of the important things about, because I also did a paper on media resistance or resistant media, is that even podcasts like this that we may not think has, you know, millions of viewers, even if 1,000 people watch this and 100 people are changed, those 100 people will be changed, and then they will go and change other people, and that's how change takes effect. And that's why if you look in the last 2 years, what has happened in Palestine has genuinely changed a lot of Western citizens, public's opinion about how the whole system works. And it's that there is money to be sent to bomb children, but we don't have money to invest in healthcare of our own countries. There's money to go somewhere else to support a prolonged war that, if it was stopped 2 years ago, 1 million people wouldn't die. However, there isn't enough money to support the education system that is crumbling, the buildings that are crumbling. I remember when I was living in UK 2-3 years ago, literal school buildings were crumbling. Buildings were falling down. Okay, like if this happens in Africa or Iran, okay, Iraq, yeah, war-torn, blood poor, whatever, sanction. But in UK, the top 10 economy in the world, why is this happening in the UK where, like you said, you're paying 52% tax? That's a lot of tax, by the way. We pay like 40% when it gets to £34,000, but that's still a lot of tax. We have more money in the UK. Like if you look at the GDP of the country, it's more than it was 20 years ago, right? But then there's more people in ratio who are poor and living under poverty line. How did that happen where there's more money in a country, but there's more people, poor people, than when I moved there 40 years ago? So definitely, I think that Gods of Finance and the Dogs of War, it's very interesting. That also, I remember you connected it to the housing bubble, that all of these things are intertwined. And so people say, oh, you know, it was some bankers. No, it wasn't some bankers who messed up. It's all intertwined. These are all part of the same group of people that are causing hardship, not to someone just outside of where me and you live in the West, but they're causing hardship to me and you, where they're making my mortgage. I remember the Liz Truss, I'll say this and I'll pass it back to Alex. Liz Truss came out with one policy a couple of years ago when she was Prime Minister, and it tripled everyone's mortgage overnight because interest rates had to go up and the economy got screwed and everything. So these people have, I think sometimes they have no idea what they're doing. They are making it they are making up as they go along. I'll pass it back to Alex.
Grace, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, they're not making it up as they go along because they know exactly what they're doing, because they end up winning every time, you know. So they have a very well-trodden path, and it's actually, you know, path is not the right word. It's pretty much like an industrial scale vacuum that, you know, vacuums up wealth from where it's produced in a financialized form to themselves, and they keep repeating the same pattern. And, you know, also we have to recognize that the fact that they colonize other countries doesn't benefit people at home. For example, when France was in control of Niger, they were buying uranium ore from Niger for about $1 a kilo, when the market price was between $100 and $200 a kilo. At the same time, in France, where, you know, I think something close to 60% of all electricity is generated from nuclear power plants, has one of the most expensive electricity. The French electricity is among the most expensive in the world. So the people in France pay high electricity, and people in Niger are being cheated out of their country's wealth. But, you know, the middleman wins, and the middleman is usually owned or controlled by their creditors, who are the world's largest banks. And then, of course, if somebody in Niger comes to power and says, how come we're getting only $1 when this cost 100? And they say, we want more. We want 20%, 50%. Well, then we send assassins. We send death squads. Allegedly, Ibrahim Traore has survived now 18 assassination attempts because he wants to keep his country's wealth at home. He's building housing for his people. He's investing in farming. Up until he came to power, 80% of the inhabitants of Burkina Faso were living off of subsistence farming. And that's after 120 years of colonization by France. Okay, so Burkina Faso won their independence in 1960, but they had to sign a pact with France, which left them effectively in a colonial subordination to France. So basically the same system. They were nominally independent and free, but the economic relations between Burkina Faso and France was still colonialist. And so the result of 120 years of colonization by France over Burkina Faso made it that Burkina Faso was consistently ranking as one of the world's poorest nations. In 2021, their Human Development Index ranked them as number, I think, 186 out of 191 nations. So that's a dismal record. The French had 120 years to help Burkina Faso develop, and the result was they're one of the poorest nations in the world. That is not by accident. You cannot maintain that kind of an accident for 20 years solid, for 120 years solid. So, Ibrahim Traore is a reaction to that. But they won't let it be. They keep trying to assassinate him.
And hello, are you still there?
Yeah, I am. Okay. I'm here. I just stopped talking.
No. I thought you froze. No, and Alex, what I was going to ask you is, because I know it's always a conversation when people say, "Oh, China," and this. I didn't really want to focus this conversation about China, but since Hartmut brought it up, so I said, well, China will have all those long-term, 20-year, 30 years, 40 years contract with a country. But maybe Alex know more which country. If I remember it correctly, if I can see it, if I can understand it correctly, at least those countries that they have those long-term contracts, the livelihood, the people's economic situations are getting better as compared to just what you just mentioned, Alex, right? That, when it's the West, or especially if it's, the France, UK, United States under this kind of system, they can promise something, but in fact, as you mentioned, every time the local government wants to be sovereign and wants to be prosperous, that's the time that no, it's not happening. So I don't think it's fair always to say that China has the same intention. I guess we have to see it as
it's actually very different. Johns Hopkins University, we now have about 30 years of data and records of China financing development around Africa. And I think that the researchers at Johns Hopkins University went through about 2,000 or 3,000 individual loans, and they haven't found even a single example where the Chinese repossessed or foreclosed on any, they haven't repossessed the collateral, not a single example. And so a few years ago, I was in Frankfurt at a conference where there were many delegates from African countries. And I noticed that they were all very, very upbeat about all these Chinese investments. And so I asked a number of them about what does this look like? And they said, oh no, the Chinese approach is completely different from that of the West. And he said that, well, different testimonies, but they were all very positive about it. I heard things like, for the first time in living memory, we think that our children will be better off. I was told about the Chinese approach, for example, if part of the aid package includes agricultural equipment, tractors and things like this, they said, if we obtain tractors from the Western countries and the tractors broke down, the service fees would be through the nose and it would all add to our debts. The Chinese, not the same thing. They said that the Chinese would immediately send technicians and engineers who would bring parts, who would then instruct the local farmers about how to fix the tractors and how to maintain them. It wasn't aimed at exploiting them to the maximum, but in order to enable them to become self-sufficient. And one of the most spectacular story was a young man from Yemen. And he told me how the Chinese built a port in Yemen. And apparently they invested about $500 billion in building this port in Yemen. And the Yemenis were, how are we ever going to be able to pay off a $500 billion loan, $500 million loan? And they said that the Chinese said, don't worry about it. This port should enable you to upgrade your economy, help your development. And so for the next 20 years, you owe us nothing. And when your economy develops, then you're going to start paying us back. It seems to me that, in the same way that the Chinese lifted 850 million of their own citizens out of poverty and into the, let's call it, middle class, I think that their strategy is to do the same across the global south. And I think that their interest is reasonably clear. They have positioned themselves as the global manufacturing hub. And obviously they want to have affluent consumers all around the world, not to depend on US markets or European markets, but to have 3 or 4 billion affluent consumers everywhere around the world who can afford Chinese products.
And that's, if I just add to that, and that makes sense, because when Trump, in his first term, was bullying China was more timid. But since this year, he started to, start using the tariffs and the bullying techniques. China's like, look, that's it. That time is over. If we need to fight, we'll fight to the end. The Chinese never speak like that. The Chinese are never aggressive like that. But they said, look, we have more customers outside of US. And I think they prepared in the last 10, 20 years for something like this, because they knew eventually the US would switch against China after allowing China's growth and investing in it to be part of the globalization. So they knew a time will come where the US and I don't know about Europe, because you have Spain going there, you have Switzerland apparently doing some stuff. So Europe is a different case, because it's a mishmash of independent and united countries. But when the US, they knew US would flip against China. China's like, no problem. We have, like you said, we're invested in Africa to grow the population to become consumers and well enough. So I think the Chinese have the mentality of win-win. The global north, the United States, is like, no, we win, you lose. So I think the Chinese, one of the Chinese academics who was speaking one of the programs, he said, look, we've been around for 5,000 years. America's only been a small part of that 5,000 years of our history, and we will continue being around after America. So I think most of the global south and even a lot of the global north have realized this, that this idea of imposing a win-lose situation is not tenable. You can't continue like this. We have to have a win-win situation because that is sustainable and that is beneficial for these countries. You don't have to be as rich as the United States to be able to have a decent, standard of living. Well, a lot of the money isn't in the hands of the majority of the United States anyway. There was a statistics a couple of years ago and they said half of US population equates the same wealth as the top 3 in the United States, or the top 4. 4 individuals have enough wealth that equates to half of, that's 150 million, 160, 70 billion United States citizens, which is absolutely mind-boggling to a country that is the most powerful and richest country in the world. So I think the China model, like Alex said, we don't need to criticize it or praise it in a way. It's doing its thing anyway. But I think each country have to bear in mind that ultimately China has its own political and economic agenda. Us as a country, me as a country, is Iran, or I don't know, Serbia, or I don't know, Burkina Faso. What do I have that I can participate in this global trade, as opposed to who can come to save me? The idea of who can come to save me, even be China, needs to go out the window, because nobody genuinely has the ability to save anyone else. It has to be each country themselves.
I want to emphasize something with respect to China. There was maybe a misunderstanding from my side. It is not China who is blackmailing any country in Africa. This is not the case. The situation is that they have the collateral, because they invest in the infrastructure in Africa, and they get the collateral as, for example, sovereign guarantees. The problem is, for example, if an African country want to implement, let's say, a petrochemical facility in order to increase their growth by selling a real product and not only the crude oil, they are facing the problems with the West. Because, for example, if the president wants to implement this kind of facility, the ministers and the secretaries, let's say the people around him, they are paid by the West. They are paid for exporting the crude oil and importing the product. And so there are structures in these governments which don't want any change. And this is the situation. It's part of the Western policy. It's not China. Yeah.
So, Alex, we have 7 more minutes before the 60 minutes allowance that you have. If there's, what is it that you wanted the viewers or those listening to really take away from this topic? Because I think it's very timely and so important for people to understand that. In fact, in my own little mind, in my own little community, if I have to think about it, why would I build a health food store in a community where people cannot afford it? So of course I'm going to put it where they can afford it. Okay, so that's kind of, and when I want more to be able to afford it. Okay, so anyway, sometimes I always bring it down to my level of my understanding. So take it away, Alex.
Well, here's what I would suggest. I spent the last few weeks at least, being very perplexed about the Trump administration and what on earth are they doing. And I can't make up my mind. Are they completely unhinged? Do they have no plan? Do they have any idea what they're doing? And then, to add insult to injury, their style and demeanor is very abrasive and, let's say, antagonistic towards other people in the world. So it doesn't look good. However, it crossed my mind to think what the United States would look like today if Kamala Harris was in power. And I think that it would probably resemble Britain under Keir Starmer, where you could, they would be much more aggressive about censorship. You could get arrested for praying silently on the street, and on and on and on. And then, even though it doesn't appear that the Trump administration has a plan and a clearly delineated strategy, it does appear to me that they do have a mission. And so two things that were extremely important is that he does seem determined to transition the United States from the British free trade system to the American system. That's very important because the British free trade system is doomed. It has the seeds of its own collapse baked in from the get-go. It's only a matter of time. The imbalances, all these market turmoil, the market turmoil that is happening, it wasn't created by Trump. He merely brought the prick to the bubble that was being built up and inflated for decades now. So that system is unsustainable, which means that it will collapse at some point. Trump is maybe only bringing that collapse closer, hoping to be able to effect a controlled demolition. But the mission, I feel, is right, and it's good, and I think that it needs to happen. And then the second thing that is extremely important is that he picked up the phone and called Vladimir Putin, and that the relations between Russia and China have been reestablished. Russia and the United States have been reestablished. And that relationship is by far the most important relationship of any in the world for the defense of peace. And so for those two reasons, I think that Trump deserves support. And then beyond that, it's up to the American people. What I mean by that is they brought him to power against seemingly insurmountable odds, which means that the people power matters. And if it mattered in the sense of bringing Trump into the White House, it continues to matter in making sure that Trump goes where the people want him to go. And I think that they do want him to go in the direction of peace and in the direction of transitioning the American economy from an unsustainable free trade war economy to an economy like the Chinese, which has gained the wealth and power and prosperity that it has by applying that same American system of political economy. And so I think that the developments are going in the right direction, but the road is so bumpy that everybody's motion sick and confused and disoriented. But I think that the mission is at its essence correct. And the reason why I wanted to share this is because I think it's extremely important that people don't become disheartened and disillusioned. That's all I had to say about that.
Dr. Rosa, Hartmut, any last few words from you guys before I ask Alex where the audience can follow him?
Yes, because I want to mention some things. First of all, in your last video, Alex, you mentioned that we had since 1946 246 wars. Is that correct?
I think about 250, but that count was in 2003. So
yeah. So, and the interesting thing is what we have to consider is that if there is a war in any country, there is also a flow and let's say a path which is calculated of immigration or refugees. Because if you want to conquer a country, you have to calculate also the refugees' paths so that you can conquer more. And interestingly, is like you said, it's Russia, China, and the USA. These are the three superpowers. And it looks like that Europe has only the target to fail. I read today an article, the German car industry has the license to die. And if Europe, and you said it already, that France has still the highest energy prices together with Germany. And France and Germany belonged to the most complex economical systems in the world. And with this policy, we go bankrupt. And I can't see that Trump has any interest in strengthen the European economy. I have the feel, in my opinion, he keeps on going like Biden to deindustrialize it.
Thank you, Hartmut. Well, let's see what happens. Reza, you have any last parting words?
No, I just want to thank Alex for coming and continue what he's doing. Definitely read this article, and I think he's published, several more since then, which I need to summarize into Farsi for my Farsi audience, which absolutely love that stuff. So continue what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Alex, please invite them where to follow you, Alex.
Oh, they can find me on X. My handle is @nakedhedgy. I have one publication on Substack for investors and traders, which is called iSystem Trend Following. And I also have a personal publication called Alex Krainer's Substack. So that's the three platforms where I'm the most active, and easy to find others from there.
Thank you again. Thank you, Alex. And
thank you, Grace, Reza, Hartmut. Pleasure to join you again. And until the next time.
Take care, everyone. And if you like this episode, value this episode, you know what to do. Share, subscribe, and continue. Goodbye.
Like, subscribe, and share.
Share, like, subscribe. Thank you very much. Well, anyway, till then, goodbye.